When Shaquille O'Neal walked into a conference room on the 40th floor of the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, he wasn't there to talk about basketball. He was there to talk about money. Real money. $30 million of it. He sat down at a long oak table, surrounded by 12 investors in expensive suits, opened a leather folder, pulled out a printed spreadsheet, and started breaking down the numbers of a tech company called Novuratech. Server margins, customer acquisition costs, year-over-year growth rates. He knew every single number by heart, and when he looked the CEO straight in the eye and said, "The quick maths tell me your operating costs are 14% higher than your closest competitor." You know what that CEO did? He laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real, cruel, ugly laugh. The kind that fills a room and empties your chest at the same time. And then he said something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "Maybe stick to free throws, Shaq. Leave the quick maths to the people who actually went to business school." The room went dead silent. 12 people stared at the floor. Nobody breathed. And Shaq, a man with an MBA, a doctorate, and 4 NBA championship rings, didn't yell, didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice even a little. He just looked at that CEO with the calmest eyes you've ever seen and said 5 words. "You're going to remember this." Then he stood up and walked out. What that CEO didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the meeting was never about getting a yes. Shaq wanted to be rejected. He needed that CEO to say no, because there was a plan already in motion. A plan that had been building in silence for over 2 years. A plan involving a woman no one had ever heard of, a clause buried on page 47 of a document the CEO never read, and 19 secret handshakes that would hand Shaq control of 51% of the entire company. And the moment that CEO opened his email and saw what Shaq had done, his face didn't twist, it didn't crumble. It froze, completely froze, like a man reading his own ending. But here's the part that will really get you. The reason Shaq did all of this had nothing to do with revenge, nothing to do with money, nothing to do with proving that CEO wrong. It was about a 12-year-old girl in Newark, New Jersey, who did her homework on the floor because she didn't have a desk. And what she said to Shaq the first time they met will give you chills. You need to watch this whole video to find out what happened, because this story has a betrayal by the person Shaq trusted most, a race against the clock with only 48 hours to save everything, and an ending so emotional that it still makes grown men cry. This is the story of how Big Shaq turned one laugh into the most brilliant power move Silicon Valley has ever seen. It all started on a cold, gray Thursday morning in March 2019. The moment Declan Varish laughed, he signed away his own company. He just didn't know it yet. It was March 14, 2019. A Thursday, the kind of cold, gray morning in San Francisco where the fog rolls in like it owns the whole city. It crept past buildings. It swallowed streetlights. It made everything feel small. But nothing about what was going to happen inside the Salesforce Tower that morning was small. On the 40th floor, 12 people sat around a long oak table in a glass-walled conference room. The city stretched out below them like a toy set. These were important people. Investors with big funds, analysts with sharp eyes, tech founders with fast ideas. They all wore slim-cut suits and quarter-zip pullovers. They all sipped oat milk lattes from little white cups. They all thought they were the smartest people in the building. Then the door opened, and Shaquille O'Neal walked in. 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds of solid presence. He wore a navy blue suit, tailored so perfectly it looked like it was painted on. His shoes were size 22. His smile was wide enough to light a room. His handshake could wrap around a basketball or crush a bowling ball. Every head turned. A few jaws dropped. One analyst nearly knocked over his latte. But the man sitting at the head of the table did not look impressed. Not even a little. His name was Declan Varish. He was the CEO of Novuratech, a cloud computing startup based in Palo Alto. Declan was 39 years old, thin as a pencil, pale as paper. He was proud of his Stanford degree the way some people are proud of their children. He talked about it constantly. He had raised $120 million in Series C funding. His face had been on the cover of Wired magazine. He believed, truly believed, that he was the smartest person in any room he walked into. He had never played a sport in his life. And to him, Shaq was just a basketball player who had wandered into the wrong room. Shaq sat down. The chair groaned a little under his size. He didn't seem to notice. He opened a brown leather folder. He pulled out a printed spreadsheet. Not a tablet, not a laptop, a printed spreadsheet, old school. Then he started talking. He talked about server margins. He talked about customer acquisition costs. He talked about year-over-year growth rates. His voice was calm, steady, clear. He used a phrase that made Declan smirk. Quick maths. The quick maths tell me your operating costs are 14% higher than your closest competitor, Shaq said. But your user retention is 22% better. That gap right there, that's your gold mine. The room was quiet. A few investors nodded slowly. The numbers were right. Everyone could feel it. Everyone except Declan. He leaned back in his leather chair. He folded his arms. He looked around the table like a teacher about to correct a student. And then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a nervous laugh. Not a "that's an interesting point" kind of laugh. A real laugh. A loud one. A mean one. The kind of laugh that says one thing and one thing only: you don't belong here. Shaq, Declan said, still grinning, I appreciate the effort. I really do. But maybe stick to free throws, yeah? He looked around the room for approval. A couple of people gave weak, uncomfortable smiles. Leave the quick maths to the people who actually went to business school. The sentence landed like a slap. The room went dead silent. One investor stared at the table. Another pretended to check his phone. A woman sitting near the window, Declan's own CFO, closed her eyes slowly, like she wished she could vanish right through the glass. Shaq didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. He just sat there, still as stone, looking at Declan with those calm, dark, steady eyes. And then he said 5 words, just 5, quiet as a whisper, heavy as concrete. You're going to remember this. Nobody breathed. Shaq stood up. He closed his leather folder. He buttoned his suit jacket with one hand. He pushed his chair in gently, like a guest leaving a dinner party. Then he walked out. No slam, no scene, no anger. Just footsteps. Heavy, slow, certain, echoing down the marble hallway until the elevator doors closed behind him. The room stayed silent for almost 10 full seconds after he left. Then Declan laughed again, softer this time, and waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. Well, he said, that was entertaining. A few people forced a chuckle. Most didn't. The CFO, her name was Margot Elaine Tan, opened her eyes and looked at Declan with something he had never seen on her face before. It was pity. Not for Shaq. For him. Because Margot had seen the spreadsheet. She had seen the numbers Shaq laid out. And she knew, with every fiber of her Wharton-trained brain, that those numbers were perfect. Every single one. Shaq hadn't guessed. He hadn't Googled it on the way over. He had studied. He had done the work. He understood Novuratech's financials better than half the people in that room. Maybe better than Declan himself. And Declan had laughed at him. What Declan didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, not even Margot's, was that Shaq wasn't just an athlete who liked technology. He was something far more dangerous. He was a man with a plan, and that plan had been in motion for over 2 years. Built piece by piece, move by move, silent as fog. The kind of plan that doesn't need applause. The kind that only needs patience. And Shaquille O'Neal, Dr. Shaquille O'Neal had more patience than anyone Declan Varish had ever underestimated, which, as it turned out, was a very long list. But Shaq's name would be the last one on it. To understand the man who walked out of that conference room without raising his voice, you have to understand the boy who learned to swallow pain before he could ride a bike. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal came into this world on March 6, 1972, in a city that didn't have much softness to offer, Newark, New Jersey. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, was barely 20 years old. She was strong, fierce. The kind of woman who could work a double shift, come home with aching feet, and still sit at the kitchen table to help her son with homework. She loved Shaq with everything she had. His biological father, Joseph Toney, loved him with nothing. Joseph left before Shaq took his first steps. No goodbye, no letter, no phone call on birthdays, just a door closing and footsteps walking away. Shaq would later say that the sound of someone leaving was the first sound he ever memorized. But then came Philip Arthur Harrison. Philip married Lucille when Shaq was still small. He was a sergeant in the United States Army, tall, serious, strict in the way that military men often are, not because they don't love you, but because they love you too much to let you be soft in a hard world. Philip became Shaq's father, not by blood, by choice. And he taught Shaq two things that would shape the rest of his life. First, discipline is louder than talent. Second, never let anyone see you quit. The family moved constantly. That's what Army life does. Germany, Texas, Georgia, New Jersey again. Each time, Shaq had to start over. New school, new faces, new basketball court to find, new friends to make and then lose. By the time he was 13, Shaq was 6 feet 6 inches tall. He was the biggest kid in every room he entered, and people treated him like it. Kids stared, teachers assumed, coaches saw a body, not a brain. Adults smiled at him the way people smile at circus animals, impressed by the size, not interested in the soul. And then there was the math teacher. Shaq was in 7th grade, living in San Antonio, Texas. It was a Tuesday, remembers the day because they had a math test he had actually studied for. He raised his hand to answer a question. The teacher, a thin man with glasses and a coffee-stained tie, looked at him and sighed. "Son," the teacher said loud enough for the whole class to hear, "you'll never need to count past 10. That's what your fingers are for." The class laughed. Shaq didn't. He put his hand down, he stared at his deck, he felt his face burn. He felt something twist in his chest. Not sadness, not anger, but something in between. Something that didn't have a name yet. He was 13 years old. He weighed over 200 pounds. And in that moment, he felt as small as a penny dropped on a gymnasium floor. He went home that night and told Philip what happened. Philip didn't hug him. He didn't say, "It's okay." He sat across from Shaq at the kitchen table, looked him dead in the eyes, and said something Shaq would carry for the rest of his life. "Good. Now you know what they think of you. Use it. Use it. Not fight it, not cry about it, not prove them wrong with words. Use it." Shaq didn't fully understand what that meant at 13, but he would. Oh, he would. Because 26 years later, when Declan Varish laughed at him in a glass tower in San Francisco, Shaq didn't feel pain. He didn't feel embarrassment. He didn't feel small. He felt fuel. The same fuel that had been burning inside him since that classroom in San Antonio. The same fire that pushed him through LSU, where he dominated college basketball starting in 1989. The same heat that carried him to the Orlando Magic, who picked him first overall in the 1992 NBA draft. 4 NBA championships, 3 finals MVP trophies, a career average of 23.7 points per game. He was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2016. He starred in movies. He released rap albums. He became one of the most famous human beings on the planet. But here's what most people never knew. While the world watched Shaq dunk basketballs and dance on television, he was also sitting in classrooms. Quietly, consistently, without cameras, without attention, without anyone clapping. He earned his bachelor's degree from LSU in 2000, 8 years after leaving for the NBA. Most people would have forgotten about school. Shaq went back. In 2005, he earned his MBA from the University of Phoenix. And in 2012, he earned his doctorate, an Ed.D. in Human Resource Development, from Barry University in Miami, Florida. Dr. Shaquille O'Neal. The same man who was told he'd never need to count past 10 now had more degrees than the teacher who said it. More degrees than most of the investors in that conference room. More degrees than Declan Varish himself. But Shaq never mentioned his education in that March 2019 meeting. He didn't bring his diplomas. He didn't correct Declan's business school, comment by saying, "Actually, I have an MBA and a doctorate." He didn't need to, because Shaq had learned something over the years that no degree can teach you. Something Philip Harrison had planted in him at that kitchen table in San Antonio. The best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, it's patient. It moves like water under a locked door, slow, steady, impossible to stop. And there was one person who understood this better than anyone. One person who had helped Shaq turn that patience into a weapon sharper than any insult Declan Varish could ever throw. Her name was Tamara Elliston Keyes, and she was not the kind of woman you saw coming. If you passed Tamara Elliston Keyes on the street, you wouldn't look twice. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She was 51 years old, average height, average build. She wore reading glasses with thin silver frames that she pushed up her nose when she was thinking, which was almost always. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her nails were short and unpainted. Her voice was soft, not weak soft, dangerous soft. The kind of soft that makes you lean in closer. And by the time you realize what she said, it's already too late. Tamara was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1968. Not the Detroit of car commercials and Motown glory. The other Detroit. The one with boarded-up windows and empty lots where houses used to be. The Detroit where winter didn't care if your furnace was broken. Her mother, Gloria Elliston, worked 2 shifts at a laundromat on Gratiot Avenue, morning and night, 6 days a week. Her hands were always dry, always cracked. She smelled like bleach and fabric softener even on Sundays. Her father, Curtis Elliston, repaired furnaces for a living. He drove a rusted Ford van with a toolbox in the back that weighed more than Tamara did. He could fix anything that was broken, except the neighborhood they lived in. They had no hot water in their apartment until Tamara was 9. Boiled pots on the stove every morning to wash her face for school. She did her homework under a lamp that flickered when the wind blew too hard outside. She ate cereal with powdered milk because real milk cost too much. But Tamara could do something that no amount of poverty could take away. She could think. Not just regular thinking, deep thinking. The kind that sees patterns where other people see chaos. The kind that reads a page of numbers and hears a story. The kind that made her math teacher at Cass Technical High School pull her aside one day and say, "Girl, you have a gift. Don't you dare waste it." She didn't. Tamara earned a full academic scholarship to Howard University in Washington, D.C. She studied economics. She graduated summa cum laude, which means at the very top of her class. Then she earned a second scholarship, this time to the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Wharton is one of the hardest business schools in the world to get into. Tamara didn't just get in. She thrived. By the time she was 30, Tamara Elliston Keyes was one of the sharpest corporate finance minds in the country, and almost nobody knew her name. That was on purpose. She didn't go on CNBC. She didn't write books with her face on the cover. She didn't give TED Talks or post inspirational quotes on social media. She didn't attend tech galas in designer gowns or schmooze at cocktail parties with venture capitalists. She worked, quietly, precisely, relentlessly. She carried a green leather briefcase that was older than some of her clients. The zipper was broken on one side. The handle was worn smooth from years of grip. Inside it, at any given moment, were the financial futures of companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That briefcase had been her father's. Curtis Elliston had used it to carry furnace manuals and invoices. When he passed away in 2003, heart attack, 59 years old, on a Tuesday morning in his van, Tamara took the briefcase from the passenger seat and never let it go. She carried it every single day. It reminded her of something Curtis used to say when he came home exhausted, hands black with soot, too tired to eat dinner. The people who fix things don't get famous, baby girl. They just get necessary. Tamara became the most necessary person most people had never heard of. She advised hedge funds. She restructured failing companies. She helped turn small startups into empires. Always from behind the curtain, always without her name in the headline. CEOs called her at midnight. Billionaires asked for her opinion before making moves that would shake entire industries. And she always answered the same way. Glasses pushed up, briefcase open, voice soft as cotton. Show me the numbers don't lie. People lie, numbers don't. Shaq met her on a warm evening in October 2014. The place was Atlanta, Georgia. The occasion was a private dinner hosted by Tyler Perry at his sprawling studio complex on the south side of the city. It was a small gathering, maybe 20 people, entertainers, business owners, a few athletes. The kind of dinner where the wine costs more than a car payment and the conversations are worth more than the wine. Tyler Perry had invited Shaq personally. They'd known each other for years. Perry respected Shaq, not for the basketball but for the way Shaq thought about money. Most athletes spent it. Shaq studied it. That night, Perry walked Shaq to a corner table where a woman sat alone, reading something on her phone with her glasses halfway down her nose. "Shaq," Perry said, "this is Tamara. If you ever want to go from rich to wealthy, talk to her." Then Perry walked away and left them alone. Shaq sat down across from Tamara. She looked up at him. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "Nice to meet you." She didn't mention basketball or championships or movies. She said, "Do you know the difference between rich and wealthy?" Shaq paused. "Rich is what I am now. And wealthy? Wealthy is what I want to be." Tamara studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, she smiled. It was a small smile, careful, like she was deciding whether to trust him. "Rich is a paycheck," she said. "Wealthy is a legacy. Rich is what you earn. Wealthy is what your grandchildren feel. And the bridge between rich and wealthy isn't earning more." She leaned forward. "It's owning more." That word hit Shaq like a drumbeat. Owning, not investing, not endorsing, not lending his name to some product on a billboard. Owning. They talked for 4 hours that night. The dinner ended around them. Plates were cleared, candles burned down to nothing. Other guests said goodbye and drifted out to their cars. But Shaq and Tamara stayed at that corner table, talking about money, power, patience, and the one thing Tamara believed most people got wrong. "Everyone wants to win fast," she said. "But the people who win biggest? They win slow, they watch, they wait, they move when nobody's looking." Shaq nodded slowly. He felt something shift inside him that night. Not a new idea, a new gear. Like an engine that had been running at half speed his whole life had finally clicked into full power. By 2017, Tamara Elliston Keyes was Shaq's senior strategic advisor. Not his financial manager. He had a team for that. Not his accountant. Not his agent. She was something else entirely. She managed his moves. She told him which companies to watch, which industries were about to shift like tectonic plates, which markets were overheated, which CEOs were brilliant, and which ones were just good at making speeches. She was the reason Shaq invested in Ring, the doorbell company, before Amazon bought it for over $1 billion. She was the reason he got into Google early. She was the reason he understood that technology wasn't just the future, it was the present, and whoever owned the infrastructure owned the game. Then, in late 2018, she brought him a file, a thick one, cream-colored folder, pages and pages of financial data, organizational charts, investor histories, and market projections. She set it on the table in front of Shaq at his home office in Windermere, Florida, and tapped it once with her index finger. "This company," Tamara said, "is called Novuratech." Shaq opened the folder. "They're undervalued by at least 40%, she continued. "Their core technology is solid. Their cloud infrastructure is best in class for their size. But their leadership is reckless. The CEO is arrogant, careless with capital, and burning through cash like it's kindling." Shaq flipped through the pages. His eyes moved slowly, carefully. He had learned to read financial documents the way some people read novels, looking for the story hiding between the lines. "What's his name?" Shaq asked. "Declan Varish, Stanford guy. Wired magazine cover. Thinks he invented the cloud." Shaq almost smiled. Almost. "In 18 months, Tamara said, sitting down across from him, he's going to need a lifeline. His burn rate is unsustainable. His early investors are getting restless. And there's something else." She reached over and flipped to page 47 of the investor agreement. She pointed at a clause buried deep in the fine print, the kind of clause that most people skip because their eyes glaze over after page 10. Shaq read it. Then he read it again. Then he looked up at Tamara. "Does he know this is in here?" Shaq asked. Tamara's smile returned, that same small, careful smile from the night they met in Atlanta. "He has no idea," she said. "He didn't write it. His original legal team did, back during the seed round. It's been there since day one, and it changes everything." "How do we get in?" Shaq asked. Tamara leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "We don't get in," she said. "We let him lock the door, then we buy the building." Shaq stared at her. Then he laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Not a mocking laugh. A real laugh. A warm one. The kind of laugh that comes from deep in the belly when you realize you're sitting across from someone who thinks 10 moves ahead. "You're scary," he said. "I know," she said. And just like that, the plan was born. But there was one thing Tamara needed Shaq to do first. One thing that would require something harder than money. Harder than strategy. Harder than any business move he'd ever made. She needed him to walk into a room full of people who would look down on him and let them. She needed him to be laughed at. On purpose. And that's exactly what happened on March 14, 2019, on the 40th floor of the Salesforce Tower, when Declan Varish told a man with 3 degrees and 4 championship rings to stick to free throws. The laugh wasn't the wound, it was the door opening. After Shaq walked out of that conference room, something strange happened. Nothing. No angry interviews, no tweets, no Instagram posts with cryptic captions, no leaked stories to journalists, no phone calls to Declan's board members, no lawyers sending threatening letters, just silence. And silence, when it comes from a man as loud and famous as Shaquille O'Neal, is the most terrifying sound in the world. Declan Varish didn't hear it. He was too busy being Declan Varish. Within a week, he had forgotten the meeting entirely. Shaq was a punchline to him now, a funny story he told at dinner parties. "You should have seen his face," Declan would say, swirling his wine glass. A 7-foot guy with a printed spreadsheet talking about quick maths. Priceless. People laughed when Declan told the story. They always did. Because Declan was the kind of man who made you feel like you had to laugh. Not because he was funny, but because he was powerful. And powerful people don't like silence when they expect applause. But while Declan was laughing, Shaq was working. Between April 2019 and September 2020, 18 months of absolute quiet, Shaq and Tamara executed a plan so precise and so patient that it could have been designed by a Swiss watchmaker. Step 1 was invisible. Shaq invested in 3 of Novura Tech's competitors. Small amounts, $2 million in one, $5 million in another, $3 million in the third. None of these investments made headlines. None of them were big enough to attract attention. But each one gave Shaq something more valuable than profit. Access. Access to industry data. Access to client lists. Access to pricing models. Access to internal reports about cloud computing trends that only insiders could see. Shaq learned how the industry worked. Not from the outside, the way journalists and analysts see it, but from the inside, the way builders and operators see it. He studied Novura Tech the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. He learned where the company was strong, where it was weak, where the bones were healthy and where the fractures were hiding. And there were fractures, big ones. Declan's spending was out of control. Novura Tech's burn rate, the speed at which it spent money, was $4.2 million per month. Revenue was growing, yes, but expenses were growing faster. It was like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. The water level looked fine from the outside, but underneath, everything was leaking. Tamara tracked every dollar. She built a spreadsheet so detailed it looked like a map of a small country. Every line item, every vendor contract, every executive bonus. She knew more about Novura Tech's finances than Novura Tech's own CFO did. And that CFO, Margot Elaine Tan, was about to become very important. But not yet, not for months. Step 2 was the real masterpiece. Tamara began reaching out to Novura Tech's early investors. Not the big names from the Series B and Series C rounds. Not the venture capital firms with logos and press teams. She went older. She found the original believers, the seed round investors and Series A backers who had put in money years ago, long before the Wired cover, long before the $120 million raise. These were people like Harold Wen, a 63-year-old angel investor from Cupertino, who had written a $200,000 check in 2014 because he believed in Novura Tech's original mission. Or Diane Albrecht Soto, a retired software engineer from Portland who had invested her savings, $75,000, because she thought cloud education tools could change the world. Harold was tired. Diane was frustrated. They had been holding their shares for 5 years with no clear path to a return. Novura Tech kept raising new rounds, which meant their ownership got smaller and smaller, diluted like a drop of ink in a swimming pool. Declan never called them, never updated them, never invited them to meetings or events. They were the forgotten ones. The people who had built the foundation of Novura Tech and then watched the building go up without them. Tamara understood forgotten people. She had been one. She called Harold first, on a Wednesday evening in June 2019. She introduced herself simply. "Mr. Wen, my name is Tamara Elliston Keys. I represent a buyer who is interested in purchasing your shares in Novura Tech at above market value. Would you be willing to have a conversation?" Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Nobody from Novuratech has called me in 3 years. You're the first person who even remembered I exist. I remember, Tamara said. Harold agreed to meet. So did Diane. So did a software developer named Marcus Jiang from San Jose who held $150,000 in seed round shares. So did a retired teacher named Roberta Finch from Sacramento who had invested $50,000 of her pension money. One by one, Tamara approached them. Not with pressure, not with slick presentations or legal threats. She approached them with something rarer: respect. She sat in their living rooms. She drank their coffee. She listened to their stories. She asked about their families. And then, when the time was right, she made them offers that were fair, generous, and clean. But none of these conversations could happen publicly. Not yet. Because everything, every handshake, every phone call, every signed letter of intent depended on one thing: the liquidity window. Page 47. The clause that Declan Varish had never read. Here's what it said, buried in legal language, so dense it could put a judge to sleep. Once every 18 months, Novuratech's original investor agreement allowed a qualified institutional buyer to make a block acquisition of shares from existing shareholders, without the approval of the CEO or the board of directors. Without approval. That meant if Shaq, operating through a legal entity that met the definition of a qualified institutional buyer, could gather enough committed sellers before the window opened, he could buy their shares in one clean move, no board vote, no CEO veto, no permission needed. The next liquidity window was scheduled to open on October 9, 2020. Tamara had circled that date in red ink on a paper calendar that hung on the wall of her home office in Georgetown. She looked at it every morning, every single morning, like a sailor watching the horizon for land. By September 2020, after 18 months of quiet work, Shaq had secured signed commitments from 19 different shareholders. 19 people, 19 handshakes, 19 contracts locked in a fireproof safe in Tamara's Georgetown office. Together, those 19 stakes added up to 51.4% of Novuratech's total outstanding common shares. 51.4%. Majority control. Declan Mann laughed, the man who said, "Stick to free throws." The man who thought he was the smartest person in every room still owned only 18% of his own company. 3 rounds of funding had chipped away at his stake like waves eroding a cliff. He had traded ownership for capital, ego for dilution, control for magazine covers, and he had no idea what was coming. The window was 13 days away, 13 days. And then Shaq would walk back into that building, into that same glass-walled room, and he wouldn't need anyone's permission to sit at the head of the table. Everything was in place. The chess pieces were set. The clock was ticking. Tamara had checked and double-checked every document, every signature, every decimal point. She had run the numbers so many times she could recite them in her sleep. It was perfect, until it wasn't, because on the evening of September 27, 2020, 12 days before the window opened, Tamara's phone rang. It was a contact inside the financial press, a friend, a woman she trusted. "Tamara," the woman said, "someone's been talking. Bloomberg has a lead on your Novuratech acquisitions. They don't have the full picture yet, but they're digging. You've got maybe a week before this becomes a story." Tamara's blood went cold. She hung up the phone. She sat at her desk in the dark. She pressed her hands flat against the green leather briefcase that had once belonged to her father. Then she asked herself the question Curtis Elliston would have asked. Who broke the furnace? Someone close to the deal had talked. Someone with inside knowledge. Someone who knew enough details to give a reporter a trail of breadcrumbs. And that someone, the person who nearly destroyed 2 years of patience, planning, and precision, was the last person Shaq would ever suspect. His name was Reggie Odom, and he was Shaq's oldest friend. There are things in life that hurt more than a punch, more than a broken bone, more than losing a championship in the final seconds. Betrayal by a stranger is just business. Betrayal by a friend is a wound that bleeds from the inside. Reggie Odom was not a stranger. He was the closest thing Shaq had to a brother who wasn't born in the same house. They met in the fall of 1990 at Louisiana State University. Shaq was 18 years old, freshly arrived on a full basketball scholarship, already being called the most dominant college player in America. He was tall enough to block the sun and talented enough to make grown men gasp. Reggie was the opposite of all that. He was 5'9", skinny, quiet, a walk-on point guard from Bossier City, Louisiana, who made the team by sheer stubbornness. He wasn't fast enough. He wasn't strong enough. His jump shot drifted left like a paper airplane in the wind. He never started a single game. He spent most of his college career on the bench, cheering for other people. But Reggie had something that money and talent can't buy. He was loyal. When Shaq got homesick during his first semester, which he never told the press about, it was Reggie who stayed up with him in the dorm room, playing cards and telling terrible jokes until 3 in the morning. When Shaq's mother called with money problems, it was Reggie who drove him to Western Union at midnight so he could wire his paycheck home. When reporters surrounded Shaq after games, pushing microphones in his face, asking questions that felt more like traps, it was Reggie who stood beside him. Not talking, just standing there, being there. That's what loyalty looks like. Not grand gestures, just presence. After college, their paths split, but never fully. Shaq went first overall in the 1992 NBA draft. Reggie graduated a year later with a degree in communications and became a sports agent. Not a big one. Not the kind with a corner office and celebrity clients. Reggie was a small-town agent representing small-town athletes. He made a living, but just barely. Shaq never forgot him. Over the years, Shaq gave Reggie work, consulting gigs, advisory roles, a seat at the table whenever business was being discussed. Not because Reggie was the most qualified person in the room. He often wasn't, but because Shaq believed in something that most powerful people forget. You take care of the people who took care of you. In 2011, Reggie's mother, Dolores Odom, was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The treatment was brutal. The bills were worse. Reggie was drowning. He had already taken out a second mortgage on his house. His savings were gone. His credit cards were maxed. He didn't ask Shaq for help. Reggie was too proud for that. Shaq found out anyway. He found out because one night, after a business dinner in Miami, Reggie excused himself to take a phone call. Shaq saw his face through the restaurant window, the way it crumbled, the way his shoulders folded in like a building collapsing. When Reggie came back to the table, his eyes were red and he said, "Sorry, just my mom's hospital. They need another payment." He said it casually, like it was nothing, like it was a parking ticket. But Shaq heard the crack in his voice, and the next morning, without telling Reggie, without making a single phone call first, Shaq paid the entire balance, every bill, every procedure, every follow-up appointment. Over $340,000. When Reggie found out, he drove to Shaq's house in Windermere, Florida, and stood on the porch for 10 minutes before he could ring the doorbell. When Shaq opened the door, Reggie just looked at him, jaw trembling, eyes filling up. "You didn't have to do that," Reggie whispered. "Yeah, I did," Shaq said. Dolores Odom survived. She beat the cancer. She lived to see her 68th birthday, surrounded by family in Bossier City. She sent Shaq a handwritten card every Christmas after that, every single one. So when Tamara told Shaq that the Novuratech leak had come from inside his circle, Reggie's name never even crossed his mind. Not once. Not for a second. Tamara's team spent 3 days tracing the leak. They checked lawyers, bankers, assistants, paralegals. They reviewed phone logs and email timestamps. They looked at every person who had touched the Novuratech files, and then on the evening of September 30, 2020, Tamara found it. A restaurant receipt. Bestia, Los Angeles. September 19, 2020. 2 guests. Table for 2, bottle of Barolo, an appetizer of burrata, 2 entrees. One guest was Reggie Odom. The other was Priya Chandrasekhar. Priya was a senior financial journalist at Bloomberg. She was 34 years old, sharp as a scalpel, and known in media circles for breaking stories that made CEOs sweat. She had a nose for secrets the way a bloodhound has a nose for trails. She didn't just report the news, she hunted it. And she had been dating Reggie for 2 months, secretly, quietly. No social media posts, no public appearances, just dinners, walks, phone calls that went past midnight. The kind of early romance that makes the whole world feel soft and golden, where you say things you shouldn't because the person sitting across from you makes you feel 10 feet tall. That's what happened on September 19th. Reggie and Priya were at Bestia. The food was good, the wine was better. The candlelight made everything feel safe. And somewhere between the second glass and dessert, Reggie started talking about Shaq. He didn't mean to say too much. He wasn't trying to sabotage the deal. He wasn't trying to betray his best friend. He was trying to do something much simpler and much older than any business strategy. He was trying to impress a woman. "You wouldn't believe what Shaq's got cooking," Reggie said, leaning in with that proud conspiratorial grin people get when they know a secret. "There's this tech company, Novura Tech." The CEO laughed at him, literally laughed in his face, and now Shaq's about to buy the whole thing out from under him. Quietly, the guy has no idea. Priya's eyes widened, not because she was impressed, she was, a little, but because she was a journalist. And journalists don't hear secrets the way normal people do. Normal people hear a secret and think, "Wow, that's interesting." Journalists hear a secret and think, "That's a story." She didn't write it down in front of Reggie. She didn't pull out her phone. She smiled, touched his hand, and changed the subject. But later that night, alone in her apartment in West Hollywood, Priya made a phone call. Not to her editor. Not yet. She called a source, a contact who worked inside Novura Tech's investor relations department, a man named Kellen Briggs. She asked Kellen a simple question. "Have you seen any unusual share transfer activity in the last 6 months?" Kellen checked. And Kellen found something. Nothing concrete, no names, no numbers, but enough movement to raise a flag. Enough to make him pick up the phone and call one person, Declan Varish. And just like that, a glass of wine and a whispered boast at a candlelit dinner table in Los Angeles became a ticking time bomb sitting under 2 years of careful, patient, flawless work. Reggie didn't know what he had done. Not yet. He went to sleep that night feeling happy, feeling close to Priya, feeling like the kind of man who knew important things and important people. He had no idea that his words were already traveling from Priya to Kellen to Declan like a spark along a fuse, and the explosion was coming. Tamara sat at her desk on the night of September 30th, staring at the restaurant receipt, the phone logs, the timeline she had pieced together like a detective solving a crime. She knew it was Reggie. The evidence was clear. The trail was short. The heartbreak was long. She picked up the phone and called Shaq. It was 11 p.m. He answered on the second ring. "We've been burned," she said. Silence. "How bad?" Shaq asked. "Bad. Declan knows something. Not everything, but enough. He's calling an emergency board meeting. He wants to rewrite the bylaws before the liquidity window opens. If he gets board approval, he can block every transfer, every single one." Shaq felt the air leave his chest. He was standing in his home office. The room where his 4 NBA championship trophies sat on a shelf. The room where he had studied Novura Tech's financial documents for 2 years. The room where he had imagined this moment going perfectly. "Who?" Shaq asked. His voice was flat, not angry, flat, like a lake with no wind. Tamara paused. She didn't want to say it. She had delivered bad news to billionaires, to board members, to people who could destroy careers with a phone call. None of that was ever this hard. "Reggie," she said. The silence that followed lasted 7 seconds. Tamara counted. She couldn't help it. She counted everything. 7 seconds of nothing. No breathing, no movement, no sound. Then Shaq spoke. And what he said wasn't what Tamara expected. He didn't say, "I'll kill him." He didn't say, "How could he?" He didn't say, "Get him out of my life." He said, "Is the plan dead?" Tamara blinked. In all her years of corporate strategy, all her years of watching powerful men and women receive devastating news, she had never heard anyone respond that way. No emotion, no explosion, just the next question. "Is the plan dead?" "Not yet," Tamara said carefully. Declan's board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October 6th. If the board votes to amend the bylaws, we're done. But the liquidity window opens on Friday, October 9th. If we can file our transfer documents before the board vote takes effect, then we beat him. Technically, yes. The original agreement supersedes any amendment until the amendment is formally ratified and recorded. There's a 72-hour processing gap between a board vote and legal ratification. If we file during that gap, then the old rules still apply. Yes. And we win. Yes, but Shaq, we're talking about filing 19 separate transfer agreements in 3 days. The paperwork alone is, can it be done? Tamara closed her eyes. She thought of her father. of the furnace repairs he did in the dead of winter, crawling into basements so cold his fingers turned white. Curtis Elliston never asked if the job was hard. He asked if the job was possible. "It can be done," Tamara said, "but nobody's sleeping." "Then nobody sleeps, Shaq. What about Reggie?" Another pause. Shorter this time. 3 seconds. "Reggie is my problem," Shaq said quietly. "The deal is yours. Protect the deal, Tamara. That's all I'm asking." "I will. I know you will." He hung up. Tamara sat in the dark for a long time. The green leather briefcase sat on the desk in front of her. She ran her thumb along the worn handle. Then she opened it, pulled out her laptop, and went to work. But while Tamara fought to save the deal, Shaq sat alone in his office and did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He thought about giving up. Not because of Declan, not because of the money, not because of the legal complexity or the ticking clock. Because of Reggie. Because the man who had sat with him in a dorm room at LSU, playing cards and telling jokes until the homesickness faded, that man had almost burned everything to the ground. Not out of malice, not out of greed, out of something painfully, stupidly human. Vanity. The need to feel important in front of someone you care about. The need to prove that your life matters. That you're not just the walk-on point guard who never made the starting lineup. That you're somebody. Shaq understood that need. He understood it in his bones. Because he had felt it too. In classrooms, in boardrooms, in every room where someone looked at his size and assumed his brain was small. But understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It hurt. It hurt the way only love can hurt. Deep, dull, and impossible to fix with logic. Shaq looked at the championship trophies on his shelf. 4 of them, gold and gleaming. Each one represented years of sacrifice, pain, discipline, and teamwork. Each one had a story. Each one had been won because Shaq trusted the people around him. Trust. That was the thing. That was always the thing. You can recover from a bad investment. You can survive a lost deal. But broken trust, that's a bone that never quite heals right. He picked up his phone. He almost called Reggie. Almost. But then he put the phone down. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight there was work to do. And tomorrow the real fight would begin. Wednesday, October 7, 2020. 5:47 a.m. The sun hadn't risen yet over Georgetown when Tamara Elliston Keyes turned on every light in her home office, set 3 phones on her desk, opened her laptop, brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon, and said out loud to nobody, "All right, Curtis, let's fix this furnace." She had 48 hours, maybe less. Declan's emergency board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, October 6th, yesterday. Tamara's contact on the board, a quiet investor named Franklin Maeda, had texted her at 10:14 p.m., the night before, with a short message. Board voted to amend bylaws. Passed 7-3. Ratification filing goes out Friday morning. The liquidity window also opened Friday, October 9th. That meant Tamara had a gap, a tiny razor-thin gap. The board had voted yes, but under Novura Tech's corporate charter, the original one, the one filed in Delaware in 2013. A bylaw amendment didn't take legal effect until it was formally ratified and recorded with the Secretary of State's office. That process took 72 hours minimum after the vote. Board vote, Tuesday evening. Earliest ratification, Friday evening. Liquidity window opens, Friday morning. There it was, a sliver of daylight between 2 closing walls, about 12 hours wide. If Tamara could file all 19 share transfer agreements on Friday morning, after the window opened, but before the ratification was recorded, the transfers would be governed by the old bylaws, the original rules, the ones with the clause on page 47 that Declan never read. Legal? Yes. Technically, completely, unambiguously legal. Easy? Not even close. 19 separate transfer agreements meant 19 separate signatures, 19 notarizations, 19 SEC-compliant disclosure forms, 19 individual filings, each one cross-referenced and time-stamped and formatted to the letter. One mistake, one missing signature, one wrong date, one misplaced decimal, and the whole thing could be challenged in court. And Declan would challenge it. Tamara knew that. She knew it the way you know a wasp will sting you if you swat at it. It had to be perfect, all of it, every page, every word, every number. She picked up the first phone and called her lead attorney, a woman named Constance Nada, who worked at a small but ferocious firm in Washington, D.C. called Halloran, Nata and Pine. Constance was 55 years old, born in Nairobi, Kenya, educated at Georgetown Law, and famous among corporate lawyers for two things. She never lost a filing deadline, and she never raised her voice. "Constance," Tamara said, "I need your whole team, today. All of them. How many documents? 19 transfers. Full SEC fee compliance, time-stamped and filed by Friday 9 a.m. Eastern." Constance was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "I'll cancel everything," she said. "Send me the files." By 7 a.m., Constance's team was assembled. 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, a married couple named Jonas and Elise Beckworth, who had worked together for 20 years and could process legal documents the way concert pianists play Chopin, and 1 notary, a 71-year-old man named Theodore Teddy Sloan from Alexandria, Virginia, who had been notarizing documents since before email existed. Teddy drove through the dark that morning. He arrived at Tamara's office at 6:15 a.m. with a thermos of black tea and his notary seal in a velvet pouch. 19 stamps, he asked, hanging his coat on the back of a chair. 19 stamps, Tamara confirmed. Teddy nodded. "Better make more tea." Meanwhile, 900 miles south, Shaq was already awake. He had barely slept. Maybe 2 hours between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. And by the time the Florida sun began lighting up the windows of his Windermere home, he was dressed, seated at his kitchen table, and holding a list. 19 names. 19 phone numbers. 19 people who had signed commitment letters over the past 18 months. 19 people who had agreed to sell their shares to Shaq when the liquidity window opened. But a commitment letter is not a contract. It's a handshake on paper. It means I intend to. It does not mean I promise. And in the world of business, the distance between intention and promise is the length of one cold foot. Shaq had to call every single one of them, personally, not through a lawyer, not through Tamara himself. Because these weren't faceless investors. These were people: Harold Wen, the tired angel investor from Cupertino; Diane Albrecht Soto, the retired engineer from Portland; Marcus Jeong, the software developer from San Jose; Roberta Finch, the retired teacher from Sacramento. They had trusted Shaq with their shares, the most valuable thing many of them owned. And now, with rumors swirling and a board vote already passed, some of them might be scared. Some of them might be having second thoughts. Some of them might have already gotten phone calls from Novuratech's legal team, pressuring them to back out. Shaq needed to look them in the ear, because he couldn't look them in the eye over the phone and ask them one simple question: "Are you still with me?" He called Harold Wen first. It was 7:22 a.m. Eastern, which meant 4:22 a.m. in California. He knew it was early. He called anyway. Harold answered on the 5th ring. His voice was groggy, confused. "Shaq? Harold, I'm sorry about the time, but I need to talk to you." "Is something wrong?" Shaq paused. He could hear Harold's wife murmuring in the background. He could hear a clock ticking. He could hear his own heartbeat. "There's been a complication," Shaq said. "Declan found out about our plan. He's trying to change the rules before we can file. But we still have a window. A small one. I need to know, are you still in?" Harold was quiet for a long time. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then he said something that Shaq didn't expect. "You know why I invested in Novuratech in the first place? Tell me." "Because they promised the technology would be used for education, for schools, for kids who don't have access to good teachers. That was the mission. That's what I believed in. And then Declan turned it into a vanity project, a cash machine. He forgot why we built it." Harold took a breath. "I'm not selling my shares to you because of the money, Shaq. I'm selling them because I think you'll remember why the company was built. Am I wrong?" Shaq closed his eyes. He thought about a 12-year-old girl in Newark, New Jersey. A girl named Destiny Hargrove. A girl who did her homework on the floor because she didn't have a desk. "You're not wrong," Shaq said. "Then I'm still in. 1 down, 18 to go." Shaq called Diane Albrecht Soto next. She answered immediately. She was an early riser, always had been. She didn't hesitate. "I gave you my word," she said. "My word doesn't have an expiration date." 2 down. Marcus Jeong picked up on the first ring. He had already heard about the board vote through a friend of a friend. He was nervous. His voice shook a little when he spoke. "Are we going to get sued?" Marcus asked. "No," Shaq said. Everything we're doing is legal. Every step. But I won't lie to you. Declan is going to be angry. There might be noise, lawyers sending letters, threats that don't mean anything. If you're not comfortable, I'm comfortable, Marcus said. His voice steadied. My grandmother came to this country from South Korea with $200 in her pocket. She didn't get comfortable. She got brave. I can do the same. 3 down. Roberta Finch answered from her garden in Sacramento. Shaq could hear birds in the background, wind chimes, a dog barking somewhere. Mrs. Finch, oh honey, call me Roberta. You've earned it. Shaq smiled for the first time in days. Roberta, I need to confirm that you're still willing to transfer your shares as we discussed. Sweetie, I was a public school teacher for 31 years. I dealt with budget cuts, angry parents, broken copiers, and 6th graders hopped up on Halloween candy. You think some tech brat's temper tantrum is going to scare me? No ma'am, you're darn right it's not. File the papers. 4 down. And so it went. Hour after hour, name after name. Shaq sat at that kitchen table with his list, a glass of water, and a pen. He checked off each name after each call. Some calls lasted 2 minutes, some lasted 20. One shareholder, a venture partner from Seattle named Ivan Koretsky, needed 45 minutes of reassurance before finally saying yes. But they all said yes, every single one, by 4 p.m. On Wednesday, all 19 shareholders had confirmed. Not one had backed out. Not one had buckled under the pressure. Shaq called Tamara. 19 for 19, he said. Tamara let out a breath she might have been holding since sunrise. Then we're go, she said. Constance's team is drafting the final documents now. We'll have everything ready for signatures by tomorrow morning. Filings go out Friday at 8 a.m. sharp. How are you holding up? Shaq asked. I've had 6 cups of coffee and I can hear colors. I'm fine. Shaq laughed, a real laugh, a tired, warm, grateful laugh. Tamara. Yeah? Thank you. She paused. She pressed her hand against her father's green briefcase. Don't thank me yet, she said. We've got one more night to get through. Thursday was a blur of documents. Signatures arrived by secure courier, by encrypted email, by fax. Yes, fax. Teddy Sloan stamped 19 notarizations with the precision of a Swiss clockmaker. Each stamp had to be aligned perfectly. Each signature had to match the name on file. Each document had to be checked, cross-checked, and checked again. Constance Nata didn't leave the office for 36 hours. Jonas and Elise Beckworth took turns sleeping on a couch in the break room. One slept while the other proofread, then they switched. Tamara drank so much coffee that by Thursday night, her left eye twitched every 11 seconds. But at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday, October 8, 2020, the last document was signed. The last notarization was stamped. The last filing was formatted and loaded into the SEC's electronic submission system. 19 transfers, 51.4%. Every comma in the right place. Every number accurate to the 4th decimal. The filing was scheduled to submit automatically at 8:09 a.m. Friday morning, 1 hour before Novoratech's liquidity window officially opened, and a full 9 hours before the bylaw amendment could be ratified. Tamara stared at the screen. The cursor blinked. The clock on the wall ticked. She picked up her phone and sent one text to Shaq, loaded scheduled. 8 a.m., we did it. Shaq read the text. He was lying on his couch in Windermere, still dressed, still awake. The TV was on. Some old basketball game, the sound turned off. He could see himself on the screen, 20 years younger, soaring through the air in an Orlando Magic jersey. He looked at the text again. We did it, not yet, he thought. Almost, but not yet. Because somewhere in Palo Alto, Declan Varish was awake too. And Shaq knew, he knew, that Declan was planning something. Declan was not the kind of man who lost quietly. He was the kind who flipped the table and called his lawyers. But Shaq also knew something else. Something Tamara had taught him. Something his stepfather Philip had planted in him decades ago. You can't stop a wave that's already started. And this wave, built from 19 handshakes, 2 years of patience, one clause on page 47, and the quiet stubbornness of a 7'1" man who was told he'd never need to count past 10. This wave was already in motion. Friday morning would tell the story. 8 a.m. couldn't come fast enough. Friday, October 9, 2020. 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tamara was standing at her desk, not sitting. Standing, both hands flat on the surface, eyes locked on her laptop screen. The filing was set to auto-submit. She watched the clock in the corner of the screen tick from 7:59 to 8. The screen refreshed. A green confirmation banner appeared at the top. Filing received. Reference number SEC 2020 NVT 4471. Status processing. Tamara didn't cheer. She didn't pump her fist. She didn't cry. She sat down slowly. She took off her glasses. She pressed her fingertips against her closed eyelids. And she whispered, to the room, to herself, to the ghost of a man who once fixed furnaces in the Detroit cold, "We fixed it, Daddy." Then she put her glasses back on, picked up her phone and called Constance Ngata. "It's in," Tamara said. "I see it," Constance replied. "Clean submission, no flags, no errors. It's processing." "How long until it's confirmed?" "By law, they have to acknowledge receipt within 2 business hours. But processing the transfers could take until Monday. Maybe Tuesday. That's fine. The filing timestamp is what matters. 8 a.m. October 9th, before the ratification. Before the bylaw change, the original rules govern." "Correct." Tamara exhaled. "Send the notification to Novuratech's board." At 8:14 a.m., a formally worded email landed in the inbox of every Novuratech board member, every C-suite executive, and Declan Varish himself. The subject line read, "Change of majority ownership, Novuratech Inc." The body was 4 sentences long. Tamara had written it herself. She had rewritten it 11 times. Not because the legal language needed fixing. Constance had approved it on the first draft, but because Tamara wanted the tone to be exactly right. Not gloating, not aggressive, not cold, professional, calm, final. "Dear members of the board, please be advised that as of 8 a.m. Eastern on October 9, 2020, Dr. Shaquille O'Neal, acting through his legal entity O'Neal Strategic Holdings, LLC, has completed the acquisition of 51.4% of Novuratech Inc.'s outstanding common shares, pursuant to the liquidity provisions outlined in the company's original investor agreement, Section 12, Subsection C, page 47. A formal shareholder meeting has been requested for Monday, October 12, 2020, at 10:00 a.m. at Novuratech's San Francisco offices. All board members are expected to attend. Sincerely, Tamara Elliston Keyes, Senior Strategic Counsel to Dr. Shaquille O'Neal. Declan Varish read the email at 8:22 a.m. Pacific Time. He was sitting in his home office in Palo Alto. The room was sleek. Concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk made from reclaimed walnut that cost $14,000. On the wall behind him was a framed copy of his Wired magazine cover. The headline read, "The Man Who Reinvented the Cloud." Declan read the email once. Then he read it again. Then a third time, slower, his eyes dragging across each word like a man reading his own obituary. Page 47. Section 12, Subsection C. The clause he never read. The clause his original legal team had written 7 years ago, back when Novuratech was just an idea and a prayer. The clause he had never bothered to review because he was too busy being on magazine covers and raising money and telling basketball players to stick to free throws. His assistant, a young woman named Chiara Montalvo, was in the hallway when she heard a sound from Declan's office. Not a shout, not a crash, not the sound of a man throwing things. A sound worse than all of that. Silence. She peeked through the half-open door. Declan was standing at the window, his back to the room, phone in his left hand, the email still open on his screen. He was perfectly still. His reflection in the glass showed a face that had lost all its color, all its sharpness, all its confidence. His face was frozen, not frozen with anger, not frozen with shock, frozen with the sudden, sickening recognition of a man who has just realized he did this to himself. Every bad decision, every ignored shareholder, every early investor he never called back, every handshake he never returned, every person he dismissed, every person he laughed at, it all led here, to this email, to this morning, to this window where he stood looking at a skyline that no longer belonged to him. Chiara stepped back into the hallway. She didn't say a word. Across the country, Shaq was at his kitchen table. Same table where he'd made 19 phone calls. Same chair, same glass of water. The morning sun came through the window and fell across his hands. Big hands, hands that had held basketballs and trophies, and his children and the leather folder Declan had laughed at. His phone buzzed. A text from Tamara, email sent. He's read it. Shaq put the phone down. He picked up a peanut butter sandwich he'd made earlier. He took a bite. He chewed slowly. And for just a moment, just one quiet, private moment, he let himself feel it. Not victory, not revenge, not satisfaction, relief. The kind of relief that comes when you've been holding your breath for 2 years and you finally let it out. He thought about Philip Harrison, about that kitchen table in San Antonio, about a 13-year-old boy who was told he'd never need to count past 10. Use it, Philip had said. I did, Shaq thought. I used every bit of it. Then his phone rang again. Tamara. Monday, she said, 10 a.m. San Francisco, same building, same floor, same room, same suit? Shaq asked. Tamara laughed. She knew exactly what he meant. The navy blue suit, the one he wore to the first meeting, the one he wore when Declan laughed at him. Same suit, she said. Good. Monday, October 12, 2020, 9:58 a.m. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor of the Salesforce Tower, and Shaquille O'Neal stepped out. Same navy blue suit, same tie, same size 22 shoes clicking against the marble floor, same leather folder tucked under his arm. Everything was the same, and everything was different. The glass-walled conference room was already full. Board members sat around the long oak table like mourners at a funeral. Lawyers flanked both sides. Constance Nata and her team on Shaq's side, 3 attorneys from Morrison and Forster on Declan's. A court reporter sat in the corner with a stenography machine, fingers hovering above the keys like a pianist waiting for the downbeat. Margot Elaine Tan, the CFO who had closed her eyes during the first meeting, was seated near the window. She looked composed, steady. She had known this was coming, not the specifics. Tamara had never contacted her, but the trajectory. She had watched Declan spend recklessly and ignore his investors. She had seen the balance sheets tilt. She had read the same numbers Shaq had read in March 2019 and known they were right. She had tried to warn Declan. Twice. He had dismissed her both times. Now she sat with her hands folded, watching the door. Declan was already in the room when Shaq arrived. He sat at the head of the table, the same seat he'd been in 19 months ago. But he didn't look the same. His skin was gray. His eyes were red-rimmed. He had lost weight. Not in a healthy way, but in the way people lose weight when they stop eating because the anxiety has closed their throats. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie. His top button was undone. His hair, usually styled with surgical precision, was uncombed on one side, as if he'd gotten dressed in the dark. He looked like a man who had been awake for 3 days. He probably had. Shaq entered the room. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He walked the way Philip Harrison had taught him to walk. Steady, upright, eyes forward, not looking for approval, not looking for a fight, just walking like a man who knew exactly where he was going. He pulled out a chair, not at the head of the table, not across from Declan, but in the middle, at the side. A deliberate choice. He wasn't claiming the throne. He was claiming his place. He sat down. He set the leather folder on the table. He opened it, and then he looked at Declan. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The court reporter waited. The lawyers waited. The board members waited. The fog pressed against the glass walls like a curious ghost. Then Shaq spoke. Calm. Even. The voice of a man who had practiced this moment 1,000 times and didn't need the rehearsal. I didn't buy this company to destroy it. The room exhaled. I bought it because I believe in what it can do. The technology is real. Your team is talented. Your infrastructure is solid. But the leadership has been wasteful. The culture has been arrogant, and the original mission of this company, the reason it was built in the first place, has been forgotten. He opened his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. 1 page. Typed. Simple. He slid it across the table toward Declan. I'm not removing you as CEO. Not today. I'm giving you a chance. 6 months. Hit these targets. Every one of them. Declan looked at the paper but didn't pick it up. His hands were in his lap. His jaw was tight. And if I don't? Declan asked. His voice was hoarse, scraped thin. Then the board, which I now control, will make a change. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. The room felt them. The court reporter's fingers trembled slightly above the keys. Declan reached for the paper. His hand was shaking. Not violently, just enough to notice. Just enough to reveal that the man who had once laughed so easily in this room could no longer hold his own fingers steady. He read the targets. There were 7 of them. Tamara had written each one. They were aggressive. 15% reduction in operating costs, 20% increase in enterprise client retention, full deployment of the education platform in a minimum of 10 school districts. But they were fair, achievable. The kind of targets a good CEO should welcome, not fear, unless that CEO had been coasting, unless that CEO had confused being on a magazine cover with being good at his job. Declan set the paper down. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at Shaq, and something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was the quiet kind of breaking. The kind that happens behind someone's eyes when a wall they've been building for years collapses, and suddenly there's nothing between them and the truth. "Okay," Declan said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. He cleared his throat. "Okay," Shaq nodded. Then he did something that nobody in that room expected. He stood up, walked around the table, and extended his hand to Declan Varish. Not a power move, not a show of dominance, not a "look how gracious I am" performance for the lawyers and the board. A handshake, a real one. The kind between two human beings standing at the edge of something new. Declan looked at the hand, the biggest hand in the room. The hand that had palmed basketballs and lifted trophies and been laughed at in this very room. He took it. "I don't hate you," Shaq said, still holding Declan's hand. "I've been laughed at my whole life. By teachers, by executives, by people who thought big meant dumb, by people who looked at me and saw a body instead of a brain." He paused. "You're not special for laughing at me, Declan. A lot of people have laughed at me. But you can be special for learning from this." Declan's eyes glistened. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. For the first time since Shaq had met him, Declan Varish had absolutely nothing to say. He just nodded. Shaq released his hand and stepped back. The CFO, Margot Elaine Tan, was crying silently, tears rolling down both cheeks. She didn't wipe them. She didn't hide. She sat perfectly still and let them fall. Because some moments are too important to pretend they aren't happening. Constance Ngata looked at Tamara's empty chair. Tamara hadn't come to the meeting. She never did. She stayed behind the curtain, always, and allowed herself one small, private smile. The court reporter typed everything. Every word, every pause, every silence that said more than language ever could. And in the hallway outside the glass walls, Chiara Montalvo. Dec watched through the door. She saw the handshake. She saw the tears. She saw two men standing in a room full of fog and lawyers and the wreckage of one man's ego. And she thought, for the first time in 3 years of working for Declan Varish, maybe things are going to be different now. But the story wasn't over. Not yet, because there was one person who wasn't in that room. One person who should have been. One person who was at that very moment sitting in his car outside Shouse in Windermere, Florida, trying to find the courage to ring a doorbell. Reggie Odom. And what Reggie was about to do would be the bravest thing he had ever done in his life. Saturday, October 10, 2020. Windermere, Florida. 4:47 p.m. The sprinklers were running. They always ran at this time. The late afternoon sun poured through the oak trees that lined Shaq's driveway, painting the pavement in patches of gold and shadow. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's kid was bouncing a basketball against a garage door. The rhythm of it, thump, 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 sounded like a heartbeat. Reggie Odom sat in his car at the end of the driveway. Windows down. Both hands on the steering wheel, gripping it like a man hanging from a cliff. He had driven 4 hours from Jacksonville. He hadn't called ahead. He hadn't texted. He hadn't asked permission. He just got in the car and drove because he knew if he gave himself time to think about it, he would turn around. And he couldn't turn around. Not this time. He knew what he had done. Not because Tamara had told him, she hadn't. Not because Shaq had confronted him, he hadn't. Reggie knew because 3 days ago, Priya Chandrasekhar had called him from her apartment in West Hollywood. And her voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering a confession. "Reggie," she had said, "I need to tell you something. What you told me about Novura Tech at dinner, I made a call. I reached out to a source inside the company. I didn't publish anything, but the information reached the CEO." Reggie hadn't responded, not right away. He had stood in his living room in Jacksonville, phone pressed to his ear, and felt the ground dissolve beneath his feet. "I'm sorry," Priya said. "I should have told you sooner. I should have—" "Did Shaq find out?" Reggie interrupted. Silence. "I don't know," Priya said, but Reggie knew. He knew the way you know when you've broken something precious. Not because you hear the crack, but because you feel the absence of what used to be whole. He had tried to call Shaq that night. He dialed the number 3 times. Each time his thumb hovered over the green button and then retreated, like a hand pulled back from a hot stove. What would he say? How do you apologize for almost destroying 2 years of work, 19 people's trust, and your best friend's dream? All because you wanted to look impressive at dinner? You don't call. You drive. So here he was, parked in the driveway, staring at the front door of a house he had visited 100 times. A house where he had eaten Thanksgiving dinners, where he had watched Super Bowls on the biggest television he had ever seen, where he had played with Shaq's kids in the backyard, throwing water balloons until everyone was soaked and laughing. This house had been his second home. Now it felt like a courtroom. He got out of the car. His legs were stiff. His stomach was in knots so tight he hadn't eaten since yesterday. He walked up the driveway slowly, the way people walk toward things they are afraid of. Not because the thing is dangerous, but because facing it means facing themselves. He reached the front porch. He stood there. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3, 5. The sprinklers hissed, the basketball thumped. A mockingbird sang from the roof of the house next door, running through its whole catalog of stolen songs. 7 minutes. 8. Reggie looked at the doorbell. It was an ordinary doorbell. Small, round. A little Ring camera mounted above it. One of the products Shaq had invested in before Amazon bought the company. Reggie almost laughed at that. Almost. 9 minutes. His hand rose. Fell. Rose again. 10 minutes. He pressed the bell. Inside, the chime echoed through the house. Heavy footsteps followed. The kind of footsteps that could only belong to one person on Earth. The floor vibrated slightly. The door opened. Shaq stood there in a gray t-shirt and basketball shorts, no shoes. His eyes were calm but tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too many things at once. He looked at Reggie. He didn't speak. Reggie looked at Shaq. He tried to speak. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His chin trembled. His eyes filled up fast, not slowly, not one tear at a time, but all at once like a dam cracking. "I know what I did," Reggie said. The words came out ragged, torn at the edges. "I know I almost ruined everything." Shaq didn't respond. "I didn't do it to hurt you. I swear on my mother's life, Shaq, I didn't do it to hurt you. I was stupid. Voice broke. He pressed his fist against his mouth and closed his eyes. Tears ran down his cheeks and dripped off his jaw. "I was trying to be somebody I'm not. I wanted her to see me the way she sees you, the way everyone sees you. Like I matter. Like I'm not just the walk-on who never started." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Shaq leaned against the doorframe. The same doorframe where his children had stood on their tiptoes and pressed their heads against the wood, while Shaq drew pencil lines to mark how tall they were getting. The marks were still there. Little horizontal lines with names and dates beside them. Sharif, 5-2 June 2011. Amira, 4-8 March 2013. Shakir, 4-11 August 2014. Miera, 4-6 January 2015. A doorframe full of growth, full of time, full of proof that people get bigger than they used to be. Shaq looked at his oldest friend, really looked at him, not at the mistake, not at the leak, not at the near catastrophe that had almost cost him everything. He looked at the man, the walk-on point guard from Bossier City who couldn't shoot straight but could make anyone laugh. The guy who stayed up playing cards in a dorm room when an 18-year-old kid from Newark missed his mother. The son who sat by his mother's hospital bed during chemo, holding her hand even when she didn't know he was there. This man, this flawed, frightened, foolish, faithful man. "You remember when your mom got sick?" Shaq asked quietly. Reggie nodded. He couldn't speak. The tears were coming too fast now. "I didn't pay those bills because you were useful to me," Shaq said. "I paid them because you're my brother." Reggie's knees buckled. Not all the way, he didn't fall, but they gave just enough that he leaned forward, one hand catching the doorframe. "And brothers mess up," Shaq said. "Brothers do stupid things. Brothers say things they shouldn't at dinner with people they shouldn't. Brothers break trust in ways that feel unforgivable." He paused. "But brothers also come back. They drive 4 hours without calling. They stand on porches for 10 minutes because they're scared, and they ring the bell anyway. Reggie was sobbing now. Full sobs, the ugly kind. The kind that come from so deep inside your body that your ribs hurt. The kind you haven't allowed yourself to cry since you were a child, because the world told you men aren't supposed to break like this. But Reggie broke, right there on the porch, in the golden light, with the sprinklers running and the mockingbird singing its stolen songs. Shaq stepped forward, and he hugged him. Two men on a porch in Florida, one 7'1", one 5'9", arms wrapped around each other, one shaking, one steady, both holding on. It lasted a long time. Long enough for the sprinklers to cycle off and cycle back on. Long enough for the basketball next door to stop bouncing. Long enough for the sun to slide behind the oak trees and turn the sky the color of a ripe peach. When they finally separated, Reggie wiped his face with both hands and took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Shaq. I know. I'll do anything. Whatever it takes. Don't ever do it again. I won't. I swear. And you're buying me dinner. Somewhere expensive." Reggie let out a sound that was half law, half sub. The kind of sound that only happens when relief and grief collide. "Deal," Reggie said. "Anywhere you want. Ruth's Chris."
Of course.
2 steaks, obviously. And dessert. They stood on the porch for a while longer, not talking, just being. The way they used to sit in that dorm room at LSU, no words needed, just the presence of someone who knows you all the way through. Eventually, Shaq put his arm around Reggie's shoulder and guided him inside. "Come on," Shaq said. "There's leftover pizza, and I need to tell you something." "What?" Shaq looked at him, and in that look was something bigger than forgiveness. Bigger than friendship. It was the look of a man who had decided deliberately, carefully, against every rational argument, to keep believing in someone who had failed him. "I need to tell you why I bought the company," Shaq said. "The real reason, not the business reason, not the money reason, the real one." Reggie blinked. "It wasn't about Declan? No. It wasn't about the laugh? No." Reggie stared at him. "Then what was it about?" Shaq opened the door wider. The house was warm, the lights were on. The championship trophies gleamed from the shelf in the office down the hall. "It's about a girl in Newark," Shaq said. "A 12-year-old girl who does her homework on the floor. And if you come inside, I'll tell you everything." Reggie stepped through the door, and for the first time in a week, Shaq didn't feel alone. "But you'll have to wait just a little longer. Because the story of why Shaquille O'Neal spent 2 years, $30 million, and nearly lost his oldest friendship to buy a tech company he didn't need. That story starts in a 1-bedroom apartment on South Orange Avenue, and it changes everything. South Orange Avenue, Newark, New Jersey. If you drive down this street, past the bodegas with hand-painted signs, past the barber shops with faded awnings, past the churches with parking lots full of cracks and dandelions, you eventually reach a gray apartment building with no name, no doorman, no elevator, no intercom that works. Just a metal door with a broken lock and a stairwell that smells like pine sol and yesterday's cooking. On the 3rd floor, apartment 3C, lived a girl named Destiny Hargrove. She was 12 years old the first time Shaq met her, small for her age, quiet in the way that smart kids sometimes are. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that most people aren't listening. She had dark brown eyes that moved quickly, like they were always calculating something, always measuring, always counting. Because Destiny counted everything. She counted the steps from her apartment to school, 1,247. She counted the ceiling tiles in her classroom, 84. She counted the seconds between lightning and thunder during summer storms and calculated the distance of the strike in her head before the rumble finished. She was not just good at math. She was extraordinary. At age 10, Destiny scored in the 99.9th percentile on the AMC-8, the American mathematics competition for students in 8th grade and below. She was in 5th grade. She was the youngest student in the state of New Jersey to score that high in 11 years. At 11, she started solving problems from the AMC-10, the test designed for high schoolers. Her teacher, a woman named Mrs. Adora Obi, would print out problem sets from past competitions and leave them on Destiny's desk like gifts. Every morning, Destiny would find a new one. Every afternoon, she'd hand it back completed. Mrs. Obi's called it our little secret. But it wasn't a secret. It was a lifeline. Because outside of that classroom, Destiny's world was small and hard and fragile. Her mother, Yolanda Hargrove, was 34 years old. She worked as a cafeteria aide at Chancellor Avenue Elementary School, the same school Destiny attended. She earned $11.50 an hour. She worked 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. Before taxes, that came to $402.50 a week. After taxes, it was closer to $340 a week. For rent, for food, for electricity, for bus fare, for everything. They lived in that one-bedroom apartment on South Orange Avenue. Yolanda slept on the bed. Destiny slept on a pull-out couch that squeaked every time she turned over. The couch was missing one leg. Yolanda had propped it up with a stack of old phone books she'd found in the building's recycling bin. There was no desk. Destiny did her homework on the floor. Every night, she would lie on her stomach on the thin beige carpet, her notebook open in front of her, a pencil in her right hand, her feet kicked up behind her. She did long division like that. She did fractions like that. She did algebra like that. On the floor, in a room so small you could touch both walls if you stretched out your arms. She never complained. Not once. Because Destiny understood something that most adults forget. You don't need a perfect room to have a perfect mind. The floor worked fine. The math didn't care where she sat. But there was one thing Destiny didn't have. One thing that mattered more than a desk. A computer. Her school had a computer lab once. 6 desktops in a room the size of a closet. The screens were old. The thick, boxy kind that hummed when you turned them on. The keyboards had missing letters. The internet was so slow that loading a single web page felt like waiting for bread to rise. But it was enough. Destiny used those computers to access math programs, watch tutorial videos, and take online practice tests for competitions. She went to the lab every day before school and every day after. She treated those 6 humming, broken computers like they were made of gold. Then, in the spring of 2018, the school district cut the budget. The computer lab was shut down. The 6 desktops were removed. The room was converted into a storage closet. The door was locked. A handwritten sign was taped to the outside, room closed until further notice. Further notice never came. Destiny stood in front of that locked door on the first morning and didn't move for 3 full minutes. Mrs. Obi found her there, staring at the sign. "Mrs. Obi," Destiny said quietly, "how am I supposed to practice now?" Mrs. Obi didn't have an answer. She just put her hand on Destiny's shoulder and said, "We'll figure something out, baby." But they didn't figure something out. Because there was nothing to figure out. The computers were gone. The budget was cut. And no one with the power to fix it seemed to care about a 12-year-old girl in Newark who could do math that most college students couldn't. No one, until Shaq. He learned about Destiny through a mentorship program he had been funding in Newark since 2015. The program was called Big Steps. It paired successful adults with young people in underserved neighborhoods. Shaq had started it quietly, the way he did most of his charitable work. No press release, no cameras, no naming the program after himself. In the fall of 2018, Mrs. Obi wrote a letter to the Big Steps coordinator. It was 2 pages long, handwritten in blue ink, and it described Destiny's abilities with the kind of awe that teachers reserve for the students who make them remember why they chose this profession. "This child sees numbers the way musicians hear notes," Mrs. Obi wrote. "She doesn't just solve problems, she feels them. She understands patterns I can't explain to my other students in a week, and she grasps them in minutes. I have been teaching for 22 years, and I have never seen anything like her. But she has no tools, no computer, no access. She is doing everything on paper on a floor, in an apartment with no desk. Someone needs to help this girl before the world loses her." The letter reached Shaq's office in November 2018. His assistant, a young man named DeMarcus Powell, read it first. He flagged it, put a yellow sticky note on the front, walked it into Shaq's office and said, "You're going to want to read this one yourself." Shaq read it. Then he read it again. Then he put the letter down, stared at the wall for a long time and said, "Book me a flight to Newark." He arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in December 2018. No cameras, no entourage, just Shaq, DeMarcus, and a rented SUV that barely fit Shaq in the driver's seat. They drove to Chancellor Avenue Elementary School. The principal, a tired, kind man named Mr. Fernando Reyes, met them at the front entrance. He was nervous, not because of Shaq's fame, but because the school was falling apart and he was embarrassed. The hallway floors were scuffed. The paint was peeling. A water stain on the ceiling in the main corridor had been there so long that some of the kids had named it. They called it Lake Reyes, after the principal. He didn't find it funny. Mr. Reyes led Shaq to Mrs. Obi's classroom. The door was open. Inside, 23 students sat at desks that wobbled. The whiteboard had a crack running diagonally across it like a scar. And in the front row, sitting up straight with her hands folded on her desk, was Destiny Hargrove. She was small, thin, wearing a navy blue uniform polo that was one size too big, probably a hand-me-down. Her hair was pulled back in 2 neat braids with small white barrettes. Her sneakers were clean but worn. The soles were starting to separate at the toes. She looked up at Shaq when he walked in. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She didn't pull out a phone for a selfie. She just looked at him with those quick brown eyes and studied him the way she studied everything. Carefully, completely, without assumption. Then she said, "Are you good at math?" The whole class went silent. Mrs. Obi put her hand over her mouth. Mr. Reyes looked like he might faint. DeMarcus coughed to cover a laugh. But Shaq didn't laugh. He didn't smile politely. He didn't give a celebrity answer like, "Ha, I'm okay." He looked at Destiny Hargrove the way one serious person looks at another. "I'm learning," he said. Destiny considered this. She tilted her head slightly. Then she nodded, as if his answer had passed some private test. "Me too," she said. "But my school doesn't have a computer lab anymore. They shut it down." She said it matter-of-factly. No whining, no anger, just a fact. The way you'd say, "It's raining outside," or "The bus was late." As if losing the only tools that connected her to the world of mathematics she loved was just another thing to accept. Just another locked door. Shaq looked at the closed door down the hallway, the one with the handwritten sign. Room closed until further notice. He felt something twist inside his chest. Not pity. Pity is what you feel when you look down at someone. This was different. This was recognition. He saw himself. He saw the 13-year-old boy in San Antonio, the one sitting in a classroom, the one who raised his hand to answer a question, the one who was told, by a man who was supposed to teach him, that he would never need to count past 10. Destiny wasn't that boy. She was smarter. She was sharper. She was already further at 12 than Shaq had been at 18. But the system was doing the same thing to her that it had done to him. It was telling her she didn't matter enough to invest in. It was locking the door and taping a sign on it. It was saying, without using the words, "You don't belong here." Shaq stood in that hallway for a long time after Destiny went back to class. He didn't speak. DeMarcus stood nearby, silent, sensing that this was not a moment for conversation. Finally, Shaq said one sentence, "This is why." DeMarcus looked at him. "Why what?" Shaq didn't answer. Not then, not to DeMarcus. But that night, back in Florida, he called Tamara. It was late, close to midnight. Tamara answered in 3 rings. She always did. "I need to do something bigger," Shaq said. His voice was different, lower, heavier, like a man who had made a decision so deep that it lived in his bones. "Not just write checks, not just fund programs. I need to build something. Something that lasts. Something that reaches every kid like her. Every Destiny. Every kid on the floor with no desk and no computer and no one telling them they matter." Tamara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting for you to say that." "You have?" "Shaq, I've had a file on my desk for 3 months. A company. A tech company. Their core product is a cloud-based education platform. Advanced math instruction. Science modules. Low-cost delivery to schools with no infrastructure. It was designed for exactly the kind of kid you just described. Why didn't you show me before? Because this isn't a small investment. This is a takeover. This is a war. And you had to want it, truly want it, for the right reasons. Not for money, not for ego. Not because someone was selling you a dream. You had to want it because you saw a child who reminded you of yourself." And Shaq was quiet. "What's the company called?" he asked. "Novura Tech? And the CEO? Declan Varish, Stanford. Wired cover, thinks he's God's gift to cloud computing. And here's the thing. He built the education platform as a demo, a proof of concept to attract investors. He never planned to actually put it in schools. It's a prop. a shiny object. He's sitting on a tool that could change 1,000,000 lives, and he's using it as a slideshow. Shaq felt his jaw tighten. "Show me the file," he said. "Come to Georgetown. I'll walk you through everything." "When?" "Tomorrow." "I'll be there." And he was. He flew to Washington, D.C. the next morning. He sat in Tamara's office for 6 hours. He read every page of the Novuratech file, every financial projection, every investor agreement, every page, including page 47. And when he was done, he looked at Tamara and said the words that started everything. "How do we get in?" And Tamara smiled and said the words that became the blueprint. "We don't get in. We let him lock the door. Then we buy the building, the locked door, the sign. Room closed until further notice." Tamara hadn't chosen that phrase by accident. She had read Mrs. Obi's letter too. She had seen the photograph of the closed computer lab. She understood, just as Shaq did, that the whole plan, every handshake, every late night, every legal filing, was really about one thing: opening doors. Not for Shaq, not for Tamara, not for investors or board members or magazine covers. For destiny, for every child in every city who had been told, by their school, by their neighborhood, by their budget, by their circumstances, that the room was closed, that the tools were gone. That further notice wasn't coming. Shaq was the further notice. He just needed a company to prove it. That was never about revenge. It was never about Declan Varish or the laugh or the insult. Those things stung, sure. They fueled the fire on hard days. But they didn't start the fire. The fire started on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment on South Orange Avenue, where a 12-year-old girl lay on her stomach with a pencil in her hand, solving problems the world didn't think she deserved to solve. Destiny Hargrove lit the match, and Shaq carried it all the way to the 40th floor. April 14, 2021, 6 months after the board meeting, 6 months after the handshake, 6 months after Shaq looked Declan Varish in the eye and said, "I'm giving you a chance." Spring had come to Newark, New Jersey. The dogwood trees along Chancellor Avenue were blooming white and pink. The air smelled like warm pavement and cut grass, and the kind of possibility that only exists when something is about to begin. At 9 a.m., a school bus pulled up in front of Chancellor Avenue Elementary School. But this wasn't a regular school day. Not for this bus, and not for the 32 students who stepped off it single file, wearing their navy blue uniform polos and wide, curious eyes. They were headed to the computer lab, the same room that had been shut down 3 years ago, the same room with the locked door and the handwritten sign, the same room where Destiny Hargrove had stood frozen one morning, staring at the words "room closed until further notice." The sign was gone now. In its place was a new one, a real one, professionally printed. Dark blue letters on a white background. It read, "Count Past 10, a Novuratech Learning Lab made possible by the O'Neill Education Initiative." Shaq had named the program himself. He had been in a meeting with Tamara and the Novuratech product team when they asked what the platform should be called. The marketing people had suggestions: CloudMinds, NovuraLearn, TechBridge Academy, names that sounded like they were designed by a committee because they were designed by a committee. Shaq shook his head at everyone. "Count Past 10, he said. The room went quiet. "I'm sorry?" the lead marketer asked. "Call it Count Past 10. Nobody asked why. They didn't need to. The look on Shaq's face said it was not a suggestion. It was a decision. And somewhere deep behind his eyes, a 13-year-old boy in San Antonio was finally answering his math teacher. "You said I'd never need to count past 10. Watch me." The new computer lab had 24 stations, brand new monitors, ergonomic chairs adjusted for children, headphones with padded ear cups. Each station ran Novuratech's cloud-based education platform, the same platform Declan Varish had built as a demo and never intended to deploy. It was deployed now. Tamara had overseen the rollout personally. She spent 3 months working with Novuratech's engineering team to adapt the platform for real classrooms. Not corporate demo rooms with perfect lighting and bottled water. Real classrooms, with slow internet connections and outdated wiring, and teachers who needed the interface to be simple because they had 28 other things to worry about before lunch. The engineers resisted at first. They were used to building for investors, not for children. They wanted sleek. Tamara wanted functional. "I don't care if it looks pretty," she told the lead engineer during a heated video call. "I care if a 12-year-old in Newark can use it without asking for help. Make it work for her, not for a boardroom." They made it work. The platform offered advanced math modules, so from basic algebra to geometry to pre-calculus, delivered through interactive lessons, video tutorials, and adaptive problem sets that adjusted difficulty in real time based on the student's performance. If a kid struggled with fractions, the system slowed down and offered more practice. If a kid blew through quadratic equations like they were multiplication tables, the system pushed harder, faster, deeper. It met each child exactly where they were, and it ran on Novuratech's cloud infrastructure, which meant even schools with limited hardware and terrible internet could access it. All you needed was a screen and a connection. The heavy computing happened in the cloud. The learning happened in the room. Chancellor Avenue Elementary was the first school to go live. Newark was the first city. But it wouldn't be the last. On launch day, Mr. Fernando Reyes, the principal who had once been so embarrassed by his crumbling hallways that he apologized to Shaq for the water stain on the ceiling, stood at the entrance of the new computer lab with tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them. He didn't care who saw. 3 years, he said to no one in particular. 3 years I tried to get that lab reopened. I wrote letters. I went to school board meetings. I begged. And nobody listened. He looked at the children filing into the room. "Somebody listened," he whispered. Mrs. Adaora Obi was inside the lab, adjusting headphones and helping students log in. She wore a green dress she had bought specifically for today. She had ironed it twice. Her hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the kind of overwhelming emotion that your body doesn't know how to process, so it just trembles. She had written the letter. 2 pages. Blue ink. The letter that had traveled from her desk to the Big Steps coordinator to Marcus Powell to Shaq's hands. The letter that had brought a 7'1" man to this school on a cold Tuesday morning. The letter that had started a chain of events so improbable and so beautiful that if you put it in a movie, people would say it was too unrealistic. But it wasn't a movie. It was a Wednesday in April. And it was real. Destiny Hargrove was the 7th student to enter the lab. She was 14 now. Taller, still quiet, still watchful. Her braids were longer, and she had traded the white barrettes for small gold ones that her mother had given her for her birthday. She wore the same navy polo, a newer one, the right size this time, and a pair of white sneakers that were clearly brand new. Yolanda had bought them for today. She couldn't afford them, but she bought them anyway, because some days are too important for old shoes. Destiny walked to station 12. She sat down. She put on the headphones. She placed her fingers on the keyboard. The screen glowed blue. The Novuratech logo appeared. Then it faded, and the count past 10 home screen loaded. "Welcome, Destiny." Her name, right there on the screen, in clean white letters against a deep blue background. The system recognized her because Mrs. Obi had pre-registered every student. But Destiny didn't know that. To her, it felt like the computer knew her, like it had been waiting for her. She stared at the screen. Then she stared at the keyboard. Then she looked to her left, where Mrs. Obi was watching from across the room with her hand pressed over her heart. Then she looked to her right, where a boy named Jalen was already clicking through his first problem set, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Then she looked back at the screen, and she smiled. Not a big smile, not the kind of smile people perform for cameras or social media. A private smile, a small one. The kind of smile that happens when something inside you, something that has been closed and locked and waiting, finally opens. "This is so cool," she said. 3 words, spoken quietly, almost to herself. Mrs. Obi heard them. She turned away so the students wouldn't see her cry. Mr. Reyes, standing in the doorway, heard them too. He leaned against the wall and let out a long, slow breath. And Shaq? Shaq wasn't there. He didn't come to the launch. He didn't stand in front of the school with a giant pair of scissors cutting a ribbon. He didn't give a speech. He didn't pose for photographs, or call reporters, or post about it on Instagram. He stayed home in Windermere. Tamara called him at 9:47 a.m., right after Destiny logged in. "She's in," Tamara said. Her voice was thick. She was standing in the hallway of the school, out of sight, one hand holding her phone, and the other holding her father's green leather briefcase. All 32 students are logged in. The system is running perfectly. No crashes, no lag. It's working, Shaq. It's really working. Shaq was standing in his kitchen. Same kitchen table. Same chair. A glass of orange juice sitting in front of him untouched. "What did she say?" Shaq asked. "Who?" "Destiny." "When she logged in, what did she say?" Tamara smiled. She could hear in Shaq's voice that this was the only thing he wanted to know. Not the bandwidth metrics. Not the system performance reports. Not the press coverage, or the social media analytics, or any of the things a businessman would ask about. He wanted to know what a 14-year-old girl said when she sat down in front of a computer for the first time in 3 years. She said, "This is so cool." Silence on the line. Long silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that's full. Full of everything a person feels when they realize that the thing they worked for, fought for, stayed up for, forgave for, and refused to give up on has finally become real. Shaq said quietly. He hung up. He sat down at the kitchen table. He picked up his orange juice. He took a sip. And then Shaquille O'Neal, 4-time NBA champion, Hall of Famer, entrepreneur, investor, doctor of education, put his glass down, folded his arms on the table, lowered his head, and cried. Not for long, not loudly, not the way Reggie had cried on the porch. This was quieter, gentler, the kind of crying that happens when you've been strong for so long that your body finally asks for a turn. He cried for the boy in San Antonio, for the teacher who said he'd never count past 10, for the mother who worked double shifts, for the stepfather who said, "Use it," for Tamara and her father's briefcase, for Reggie and his mother's hospital bills, for Harold Wen and Diane Albrecht Soto and every forgotten investors who said, "I'm still in," for Margot who closed her eyes, for Declan who opened his, and for Destiny. Most of all, for Destiny. The girl on the floor with the pencil and no desk. The girl who just smiled at a screen that said her name. He wiped his eyes. He took another sip of juice. He looked out the window, where the Florida morning was bright and warm and full of mockingbird songs, and then he went back to work. Because Count Past 10 wasn't finished. Newark was just the beginning. Within 1 year, the program expanded to 12 school districts in 7 states. 45,000 students across 63 schools gained access to Novura Tech's platform. Cities that had never been on any tech company's radar. Camden, New Jersey. Flint, Michigan. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Brownsville, Texas. East St. Louis, Illinois, suddenly had computer labs running world-class math and science instruction. Test scores in participating districts rose by an average of 18% in the first year. In some schools, the jump was even higher. At Chancellor Avenue Elementary, math proficiency went from 34% to 61% in 12 months. 3 students from Newark qualified for the MathConks national competition for the first time in the school's history. Destiny Hargrove was one of them. She traveled to Washington, D.C. in May 2022, wearing a blazer her mother had found at a thrift store in East Orange and altered by hand to fit. She competed against 224 of the best young math minds in the country. Kids from private schools, kids from gifted academies, kids who had tutors and laptops and desks and every advantage the world could offer. Destiny finished 9th in the nation. 9th. Out of tens of thousands of students who started the competition, a girl from a 1-bedroom apartment on South Orange Avenue, a girl who had done her homework on the floor, stood in the top 10. Mrs. Obi flew to D.C. to watch. She sat in the audience and cried through the entire final round. She later said it was the proudest moment of her 24-year teaching career. Yolanda Hargrove was there too. She had taken 3 days off work, unpaid, to make the trip. She sat in the second row, wearing a white blouse and her best earrings, holding a small handmade sign that said, "That's my baby." When Destiny walked off the stage after the results were announced, she went straight to her mother. Yolanda wrapped her arms around her daughter and held her so tightly that Destiny had to laugh and say, "Mom, Mom, I can't breathe." "I don't care," Yolanda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm never letting go." And Declan Varish? The man who laughed? The man who said stick to free throws? The man who built an education platform he never intended to use? He hit every single one of the targets Shaq had set. Everyone, within 6 months, on time, without excuses. He cut operating costs by 17%, 2 points above the target. He increased enterprise client retention by 23%, and he personally oversaw the deployment of Count Past 10 in the first 12 districts, flying to each city, visiting each school, sitting in each classroom. He kept his job, he kept his title, he kept his corner office with the $14,000 walnut desk and the framed wired cover on the wall. But something had changed. The wired cover came down. Nobody knew when he removed it. One morning it was just gone. In its place was a photograph, a simple one, framed in plain black wood. It showed a classroom full of children sitting at computer stations, headphones on, faces lit by screens. It was taken at a Count Past 10 launch in Flint, Michigan. Declan had been there that day. He had taken the photo himself, on his phone, from the back of the room, where nobody could see his face. Because his face had been doing something it hadn't done in a very long time. Smiling, genuinely. In a podcast interview in late 2021, a long, unscripted conversation on a show called The Founders Hour, the host asked Declan about Shaq. Declan went quiet. The pause lasted so long that the host almost asked a follow-up question. But Declan raised his hand slightly, a gesture that said, "Wait, I'm getting there." And when he finally spoke, his voice was different, thinner, more honest, stripped of the polish and performance that used to coat every word. "I laughed at him," Declan said. "In a room full of people, I laughed at a man who had more degrees, more discipline, and more vision than I ever had. He came to me with perfect numbers, perfect analysis, and I dismissed him because of what he looked like, because of where he came from, because I was so convinced of my own brilliance that I couldn't imagine someone who dunked basketballs could also read a balance sheet." He paused, and instead of destroying me, which he had every legal and moral right to do, he gave me a chance. He shook my hand. He looked me in the eye and said, "You can be special for learning from this." And I have been trying every single day since that meeting to deserve those words. The host was quiet. "I don't know what that says about Shaq," Declan continued. "But I know what it says about me. It says I was small, and he was big. Not because of his height, because of his heart." He cleared his throat. "I'm still working on it," he said. "I'll probably always be working on it." The episode went viral. Not because of Declan's fame, he wasn't that famous anymore. It went viral because people recognized something in his words that they had felt in their own lives. The shame of underestimating someone. The grace of being given a second chance. The slow, painful, beautiful work of becoming less arrogant and more human. As for Shaq, he never talked about the laugh publicly. Not once. When reporters asked about Novuratech, he redirected every question to the same place. The kids. "Don't ask me about business," he said in an interview on CNN. "Ask me about Destiny Hargrove. Ask me about the kid in Flint who just learned geometry for the first time. Ask me about the girl in Brownsville, Texas, who told her teacher she wants to be an engineer. That's the story, not me." The interviewer pressed. "But the way you acquired the company, the strategy, the timing, it's being called one of the most brilliant corporate moves of the decade." Shaq shrugged. A gesture that, on a man his size, looked like a small earthquake. "The quick maths worked out," he said. "That's all," and he smiled. "Just barely, just enough." But there was one more moment, one final piece, the quiet ending to a loud story. And it came in a plain white envelope, postmarked from Newark, New Jersey, with no return address. June 2022. A Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special about it. The kind of day that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, quiet and ordinary, and then changes everything. Shaq was sitting at his kitchen table in Windermere. The same table, the same chair, the same spot where he had made 19 phone calls. The same spot where he had eaten a peanut butter sandwich while Tamara told him the filing was done. The same spot where he had folded his arms and cried the morning Destiny logged in. This table had held a lot of weight. Not all of it was visible. The mail was stacked in a pile near the edge. Bills, magazines, business letters, a birthday card from his aunt in Newark, the usual stuff. But at the bottom of the pile was something different. A plain white envelope, standard size, no return address, postmarked from Newark, New Jersey. His name and address were written in pencil. Careful, deliberate letters, the kind written by someone who wanted every stroke to be perfect. Shaq almost missed it. He almost tossed it in the junk pile. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the pencil. Maybe it was the handwriting. Maybe it was Newark. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook with the little frayed edge still attached. The kind every school kid in America has used. The kind Destiny Hargrove had used to do her homework on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment on South Orange Avenue. The letter was short, written in pencil, in the careful, steady handwriting of a 15-year-old girl who had learned, against every odd, past every locked door, beyond every budget cut and broken promise, to count past 10. Shaq, read it. Dear Dr. O'Neill, my teacher told me that someone laughed at you once because you did math. She said a man in a meeting told you to stick to basketball. She said you didn't yell, you didn't get mad, you just got quiet. And then you did something so big that nobody could ever laugh again. I want you to know that nobody laughs at me anymore either. Last week I got first place in the New Jersey State Math Championship. First place. Me. From Newark, from South Orange Avenue, from the floor. My mom cried. I cried too. Mrs. Obi cried the most. She cries a lot now. Happy crying. She says you did this. I told her that's not true. You didn't do my homework, you didn't solve my problems, you didn't take my tests. But you opened the door, the one that said, closed until further notice. You were the further notice. I don't know if I'll ever meet you again. I don't know if you even remember me. But I want you to know that every time I sit down at a computer in that lab, I think about what you said when I asked if you were good at math. You said, I'm learning. I'm still learning too, and I'm going to keep learning until I run out of numbers. And if I run out, I'll make up new ones. Thank you for counting past 10. Love, Destiny. Shaq, read the letter 3 times. The first time, his eyes moved fast, the way they do when you don't know what you're holding yet and your brain is trying to catch up to your heart. The second time, slower, every word landing, every sentence finding its place inside him. The third time, he didn't really read it at all. He just held the paper and let his eyes rest on the handwriting, the curves of the letters, the slight smudge where her hand had dragged across the pencil marks, the place where she had erased a word and rewritten it. He could see the ghost of the first attempt beneath the final version. She had worked on this letter. She had drafted it. She had chosen every word with the same precision she brought to mathematics. This was not a dashed-off thank you note. This was a 15-year-old girl laying her heart on a piece of notebook paper and mailing it to a man she had met once in a classroom on a cold Tuesday morning. You were the further notice. That sentence, that one sentence. Shaq set the letter down. He pressed his palms flat against the table. He looked out the window at the backyard where the oak trees stood tall and the Florida sun turned everything gold. He thought about his mother, Lucille, who worked double shifts so he could eat. He thought about Philip Harrison, who sat across a kitchen table in San Antonio and said 2 words that built the foundation of everything. Use it. He thought about Tamara, who carried her dead father's briefcase every day like a prayer, who found a clause on page 47 that nobody else had read, who drank 6 cups of coffee and heard colors and never once asked for credit. He thought about Reggie, who stood on a porch and cried and rang the bell anyway. He thought about Harold Wen and Diane Albrecht Soto and Marcus Jong and Roberta Finch. 19 people who said, I'm still in when every rational voice in the world was telling them to walk away. He thought about Margot Elaine Tan, who closed her eyes in the first meeting and opened them in the last one. He thought about Declan Varish, who laughed and then learned and then took down his magazine cover and replaced it with a photograph of children. He thought about Mrs. Obi, who wrote a letter in blue ink that traveled from a classroom in Newark to the 40th floor of the Salesforce Tower. And he thought about Destiny, the girl on the floor, the girl with the pencil, the girl who asked a 7'1" stranger if he was good at math and then nodded when he said he was learning, as if that answer, humble, honest, unfinished, was the only answer worth accepting. Shaq folded the letter carefully, gently. The way you fold something you plan to keep forever. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was big, everything about Shaq was big, and it was worn soft from years of use. He opened it and slid Destiny's letter into the slot behind his business card. The business card read, Dr. Shaquille O'Neal, investor, educator, proof that quick maths win slow wars. Tamara had that card printed for him. He had protested when she first showed it to him. "It's too long," he said, holding it up. "Nobody's going to read all that." Tamara had looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. That look she gave when she was about to say something she had already decided was true. "Do the quick maths," she said. "It's perfect." Shaq had laughed. A real, warm, full laugh. The kind of laugh that fills a room and makes the people in it feel like everything is going to be okay. Because it was perfect. Not the card. Not the words on it, the whole thing. The entire improbable, painful, patient, beautiful thing. The boy from Newark who was told he couldn't count. The man who counted anyway. The teacher who wrote a letter. The girl who solved the problems. The CEO who laughed, and the CEO who learned. The friend who broke trust and the friend who was forgiven. The woman with the green briefcase and the clause on page 47. The 19 handshakes. The 48 hours. The porch in Florida. The fog in San Francisco. The floor in Newark. All of it. Every piece. Every person. Every number, it added up. Because the math was never about numbers. Not really. The math was about counting the things that actually matter. The things that don't show up on spreadsheets or balance sheets or magazine covers. Patience, dignity, forgiveness, second chances. Locked doors and the stubborn, beautiful refusal to believe they'll stay locked forever. Declan Varish learned this too late. Tamara Elliston Keyes knew it all along. Destiny Hargrove lived it every single day. And Shaq carried the proof in his wallet. Right there behind a business card, folded in pencil on lined paper with a frayed spiral edge. A letter from a girl who counted past 10 and never stopped. And that's the story of a man who was laughed at for doing math and bought the whole company with it. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching this from. Whether it's Newark, New Jersey, or the other side of the planet. I want to know you're out there, and if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that patience beats pride, that kindness beats cruelty, and that the people who laugh loudest aren't always the ones who win, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, not for me, for every kid out there doing homework on a floor with no desk, for every person who was told they'd never be smart enough. Let's spread that message. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe and turn on that bell so you never miss a story like this again. We tell stories here that the world needs to hear. Now, click on the video right on your screen right now, because that story might hit you even harder than this one did. I'll see you there.